Rick Pedone, welcome to the DCQ Podcast Special Sits. I'm really happy to have you on today. How are you?
I'm doing great, Peter. Good morning. And I think it's early afternoon for you.
Early afternoon here. So I was hoping that you would do this from the boat, in trendy boat gear. But I guess
Yeah.
you're doing it today from home. So where is that?
So home is in Hingham, Massachusetts, just south of Boston, about 20 miles, about 12 miles by water when I take the commuter boat.
Excellent,
Yeah.
excellent. So when we last met earlier this year in Hong Kong, I was fascinated to hear that from an early age onwards, you were introduced by your dad to sailing, to boats, to the water, that you actually, fell in love with it and got obsessed with it and spent a lot of time on the water and with boats. And I was also, amazed when we were talking about the uncertain times that we live in. If disaster would strike, God forbid, you would actually be able to survive on your boat on the ocean for like 6 months without too many difficulties. And you're able to fix almost everything yourself on the boat. That is very impressive.
You did not say that we were going to give away all my personal secrets, Peter. But no, I said so. I don't have all the armaments that somebody might want for 6 months on the boat. But yeah, I could probably sail across the Atlantic Ocean next week.
Excellent.
Yes.
So look, with that of a background, it sort of begs the question: how and when did you decide to become a lawyer in special sits? And
Yeah.
maybe that's a good way to start this conversation.
So I'd say it probably happened to me, Peter, rather than I made a conscious decision. Um, so, um, I was in law school, and we could talk a bit more about what led up to law school, because I think that's part of the business experience, family business experience, and other experiences before law school shaped how I work today. But what directly led me to where I am today as a lawyer in a large firm, mid-sized firm by today's standards, working in special situations, was in law school. I had worked on some political campaigns and then in the governor's legal office. And I eventually thought I might do something in government or even politics going back 35 years. And then the second summer in law school, I worked for through a public interest charity grant for a children's hospital that was in the middle of a financial turnaround. And I was going to learn about healthcare law and the policy issues. Then that was going to be a short stop. And then I was going to be off, hopefully, to a large law firm. I wasn't actually very attractive to the large law firms that I thought would be a fit. So I had a big stack of rejection letters. But what I did receive was an offer from the healthcare management company that it turned out was essentially the restructuring group that had been put in to run the hospital and turn the hospital around as a result of some government issues that they had had with reimbursement and otherwise. And so it was just this wonderful charity serving children in needs. And there I was on a day-to-day basis working in the legal office next to the CEO, who had been formerly a large firm lawyer. And they made an offer to me to help them turn around a variety of troubled hospitals and healthcare providers, including a mental health center. And I was heading towards working for them, which was going to be a job that would be half law and half business, essentially, and maybe even lead to a pure business position. So I'm going along that path with them, finishing up my third year of law school, working from some for them during the third year, get to the end of law school, take a really long vacation after the bar exam.
And how does that work? How?
Yeah.
Sorry. How exactly does it work? So the charity has a role to play in, the financial troubles with the medical centers that they have funded.
So if you go back 30 years, almost all healthcare provider hospitals in Massachusetts and in the Northeast United States were owned by nonprofit organizations. So hospitals in the United States began as charitable organizations. J.P. Morgan and
Okay.
others formed hospitals saying, let's provide healthcare to people who otherwise can't need it. And let's go from, a doctor visiting you at your home to actually having real hospitals. Is how things morphed in the United States. And so that led to charitable organizations, often under essentially the same way any other charity being governed, charitable governance, actually providing the healthcare and growing into these businesses. So you had
Wow.
charities effectively running what we think of now as a hospital, as sort of a business, and being a hybrid. And of course, with the Steward healthcare failure in the United States, we could talk about that endlessly, whether that was a good idea or not, to allow the transition away from that. But at that time, it was a charity with business problems, and they brought in professional managers. And so I was part of that management team. So
Great.
I get home from a wonderful vacation, hiking in California and some sea kayaking in Yosemite National Park, to a phone call saying, we're having some troubles ourselves at the turnaround company. We've lost some contracts and you no longer have a job. So Rick Pedone, with law school loans looming, hits the street looking for a job. And that led to a variety of essentially subcontract legal work, beginning to establish my own firm, doing work for a variety of firms, extensive networking, and essentially trying to figure out a way to make a living looking for a job in a very tough environment at that time, as Massachusetts was coming out of a recession. And my wife had a job with the Boston public school system. And one day, my civil procedure professor, who knew of my plight through my bankruptcy professor, ran into the head of Nixon Peabody's bankruptcy group at their mailbox. They were neighbors. And that led to my second interview at what was then Peabody and Brown and now Nixon Peabody. And that led to a job. And of course, in my situation, I was willing to take any job, whether it was litigation, business, or restructuring and bankruptcy. And back then, it really was more creditor rights bankruptcy. And so that's what landed me in the first position. And starting out there, it was not necessarily a prearranged view that I wanted to be a lawyer in a large firm doing restructuring. But of course, I had that restructuring experience. And I had also had some real estate development experience on the business side, working for a developer who it turned out had failed. And I have to say that on the ground, being a client, being at businesses that were having problems, whether it was the healthcare providers or the real estate developer, I think that's been one of the secrets of my success, because I literally have been across the table from where I am today, dealing with the lawyers and understanding the real business issues and the intangible pressure that the clients face. And I think it's
Yeah,
been the key, one of the keys.
being part of the client and then seeing the pressure, instead of being an advisor who obviously deals with the pressure, but you don't have necessarily skin in the game, right? So if you're sitting on the other side of the table and you've experienced it at the outset of your career, I can imagine that that has a huge impact and also carries with you, maybe some appreciation and sympathy for, the dynamics on the other side, if and when you start advising stakeholders in the situation.
It is, and it's given me an advantage that I have a very hard time actually today training associates and others that I work with in restructuring for, and on frankly, all lawyers, more senior lawyers have this problem, which is how do you take somebody who came through law school, may not have worked in business, and teach them to think strategically like the client, so that you provide legal advice that solves the client's strategic problem, not necessarily just provide legal advice. And we have all seen lawyers do legal work for the sake of legal work that may not be actually what the client needs strategically or is necessarily cost effective. And I think that my early experience there in family business and those two businesses has really helped me in that regard.
And do
Now,
you think that that is something that is, something that any lawyer should embrace, or is it specifically important in the special sit space?
I think it's something that any lawyer should embrace. My favorite business lawyers. So my practice, if I were to describe myself, would be a restructuring lawyer with a lot of litigation experience and courtroom experience, and then distressed M&A experience. And I will often joke that I won't do a significant M&A transaction or even finance transaction when I'm not being supervised, right? I know my expertise is not necessarily in the drafting and negotiation of a healthy deal. It may be figuring out the leverage to get there, and it's certainly trying a contested case in bankruptcy, which drives the resolution. But there's that other part. So I work a lot with our business lawyers who regularly just do deals. And they often like to say, the best among them, including one who represented Boston Beer, took Boston Beer public, right? So these are lawyers working for reasonably large public companies. And they, in this one lawyer, Fred Grine, would often say, I went to business school first, and I'm a business person first, and a lawyer second. And the manner in which he delivers the advice and thinks like finding a business solution is something that I think the best business lawyers do, and the best lawyers I've worked with in and out of my firm do. And that's a skill set that I have through my prior work experience that others adopt differently. But it's a mentality that any lawyer can adopt. And in a way, it's a form of showing empathy, as what is the party that I'm working with, the client, actually looking for, as opposed to what might my law professor have taught me is needed or might be wanted.
And do you think that that is also a business culture that is ingrained in the US business culture, that, you know, you can't actually do anything unless you have a lawyer alongside, which I guess in the UK and Europe, the use of a lawyer may still be different from what it is in the States, and maybe it has to do with what you just articulated, that a lawyer doesn't need to be only legal. He needs to be, or she needs to be, strategic, business like, and sounding board for the client.
Yeah, I actually think the need for so many lawyers in the United States is both the country's blessing and its curse. And that because we're sort of a Wild West civil law society, I mean, a Wild West common law society, right? In a federalist system, we have such a variety of complex ways of regulating what happens. And I think that has driven the legal system, as well as the Constitution makes it pretty easy for people to access the litigation system to fight with each other or to fight the government. And you can do it at the state level, you can do it at the federal level. A business that's working around the country is going to essentially find that it's being regulated by, in addition to the EU, if it sells anything abroad, right, is finding it's being regulated by 50 states plus the federal government, or not regulated. And figuring out that path leads to a lot of complexity. It leads to some great creative solutions to problems that might not exist elsewhere, but it leads to a level of complexity that makes things people need lawyers. And so the other part of the need for lawyers in the U.S. that I think people view as problematic is the ability of people to sue each other and access to the judicial system. And we don't have loser pays. So the cost of getting into court and fighting is much lower. So it leads some very bad habits in that litigation and threat of litigation will be used in an obstructionist way. But if you actually say, if I want an economy that doesn't have literally, Peter, a king and a parliament or an EU making all the decisions, if I don't believe that a common core of people can make the decisions for disparate other people and make them well and won't become wedded to their ways, won't be bribed or whatever it is, right? If you say, I want more disparate decision making, then you need a remedy for the craziness that occurs. And in the US, the remedy of our craziness, which is maybe a company that decides to use a cheap product that could hurt people, well, the tort lawyers is part of the remedy there. Or it may just be, fraudulent behavior in crypto. What's the remedy there? Maybe it's a bankruptcy system and an ability to sue people for fraud. You need some counterbalance to that creative craziness that the U.S. economy has that very few other economies have, and that I view is being the legal system. And you're bringing me back to getting me to talk. Before I went to law school, I studied comparative government. I thought I was going to actually be a professor, and teach
I
political
saw you did
science.
that in London, didn't you?
Yes, I did that in London, where I got my master's degree in beer drinking. But I also thought a lot about
Well,
political theory.
that obviously serves you well in life. So
It
I
does.
assume that
It has.
you've used that certificate many times.
Yes. But it also, you getting me wound up talking, a way that I love to do over a drink or otherwise about, political theory and comparative government and what's the right solution to these issues. And
Well,
it's in the back of
yeah,
my mind as I
yeah.
approach every legal problem too. So
It's interesting because I was actually thinking more along the lines of I'm trying to figure out, and in conversations like the one we have today, I think it's really good to do it with somebody who is actually in that jurisdiction. Is the fact that in our space, the blueprint for rescue is still the U.S. Right, and rescue is something that I guess anybody who has been for a while in this special sit space would like to actually advocate in other jurisdictions as well. But not everything is the same, right? So how is it that in the US that rescue system has actually been able to, be established? And maybe it is unique to the US and we can learn from it, bits and pieces, but we can't lock, stock and barrel apply it to other situations. And one of the countries or jurisdictions, and one of the things I was thinking about is actually maybe the relationship with lawyers in business is in part why ultimately a rescue system can establish in the US, because it becomes less sort of personal, it becomes more business, and in the end you want to have a situation where you give people another chance to do things, and actually you also encourage people to at an early stage tell advisors about financial distress, because the earlier we know about it, the more we can do about it. But again, it's denial, it's all these sort of complex issues that are there. So one of the maybe strands is it a good thing or a bad thing that in the US there are so many lawyers in business? And I was going through the path maybe to see whether actually for a rescue culture that may actually be a good thing.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you call it a rescue culture. So there's the way I think, and of course, cultures that have given in economies, political systems that have given all of the rights to the secured creditors to take their collateral really quickly, which essentially would be the UK 15 years ago, right? You could
Yep.
take your collateral and everybody knew that, and you could borrow the money. And if you failed, the secured creditor could take the keys and you'd get in trouble if you didn't give them the keys. And, there's some other European countries that are really close to that today. I think what you're really saying is, in the United States, the company itself may have a chance to rehabilitate, and would be another word for what I think you're thinking of as rescue. And in many ways, that is the miracle, and I really think it is. And I think there should probably be a podcast or a history lesson on the enactment of the U.S. Bankruptcy Code and the ability for the company to stay in control and rehabilitate itself. Right? Because even under your system, the lender can come and grab it and rescue the company for itself, right? Here, the company that is in trouble has a window where it can choose to file bankruptcy and create a wall holding off the creditors with the automatic stay and control of exclusivity for a period of time. Now, that has come with an incredible price, which has afforded me a very comfortable lifestyle, and many other lawyers and financial advisors a really comfortable lifestyle, which is that the ability of the company to maintain control and hold off creditors was achieved by the drafters of the bankruptcy code by giving those creditors and the company the right to go to court and fight, so everybody could protect their constitutionally given right to due process and property, right? Those are in the Constitution. You get fair process before you lose your property, and you have a right to your property. Your lien is a property. So how did the drafters of the bankruptcy code decide to solve this? They said bankruptcy, what do we do with a company that has failed, will be deposited into a litigation system. So literally, at everything you go to do in a U.S. bankruptcy, you have to file a motion almost and get approval of the court, or somebody can come and challenge it. And with that comes the opportunity to do what I've done, which is develop great litigation skills on how to use that process to your client's end, or the threat of that process to your client's end. But it's also come with the ability to be a roadblock to the successful reorganization, and tremendous, tremendous cost. To the point that yesterday, I was working on an issue where, in talking to one of my partners about an issue where people are changing the governing law in the debt instruments to move the fight to a different country to escape the need to deal with the United States legal system. I mean, like, hundreds of thousands, if not millions and millions of dollars of legal time have been spent in the past couple of years on how you escape U.S. Chapter 11 or Chapter 15 and go with one of those quicker systems elsewhere. And is that good or bad? And do your current debt documents allow that? Just to me,
Yeah.
it's just fascinating, because you're saying you've got this great rescue system, and I'm looking at everybody working to escape it. And why is
Well,
that?
maybe things have changed, but again, it's also the mentality, right? If you go, and maybe that has changed too. But my experience with the U.S. has always been that somebody who actually takes the initiative, does something that is not straightforward, on the beaten path, but off the beaten path. They're encouraged to do it. And if they fail, then actually, you've learned something, have another go, and if you do that a number of times, you will succeed. So it's sort of, encouragement of entrepreneurial, business risk taking. While I think in the UK and Europe, my experience has always been that immediately if you do something that is a little bit unusual, they hone in on the risks, and they're sort of almost waiting for you to fail and then to say, well, look, yeah, that's what I thought would happen. And ultimately, you need to have a mentality also, in the country that has an insolvency system that is focused on rescue, to give people, a second chance, to enable people to take, risks. Risks that are obviously not ridiculous, and we're not sort of facilitating fraud either. But that is something that, is important in order to create a system where there are tools in the toolbox and professionals that can use these tools to rescue, businesses, or, deal with individuals that are, facing financial distress. And to me, the US has always been a system and a country where that is possible.
Yeah, so you could have a system, and I went down kind of a rabbit hole talking about secured creditor rights versus the company's right. But you could have a system where you hand the keys to the secured creditor and then you go and start over again. And what you're getting at is the U.S. always had a system, since we got rid of debtors' prisons much earlier than I think almost anyone else did in the world, including the U.K.
The
Right? I
Middle
was
Ages.
recently reading about Captain Cook didn't have his co-skipper for a while because the skipper was in debtor's prison for his brother's debt. I mean, I'm reading about this in the 1800s thinking that is freaking extraordinary. We weren't locking people up for debts that late, I don't think.
Yeah.
But we have this culture of you can start over again and again. And we have a legal system where if you're honest in your connection with your failure, and you disclose in connection with your bankruptcy what has happened, and you voluntarily part with the assets, you can move on really, really quickly. And we have a president who has talked about, personally dealing with the difficult financial situations. And, if you look at who succeeds at becoming a millionaire or multimillionaire in the United States, there's a really high number of people who have gone bankrupt or come close to going bankrupt. Abraham Lincoln had serious financial problems, right? We have essentially that forgiveness built in culturally and legally, for people to be able to move on quickly, which leads to people being willing to take risks. There are a lot of countries in Asia where you don't take the same financial risk because failure comes with a very different price. And that makes it hard for people to try, and try again when they have a good idea. And so
And why do you think is that?
I think it's built into just the American culture, and sort of and I'll call it the craziness in a good way, that is the the United States, which is, we're in this um, amalgamation of different ideas, and it's frankly sometimes a little bit rough around the edges, but it leads to faster action, faster bouncing back from a recession, faster people going and solving problems, and a lot of yelling and screaming. And historically that's happened, but I think it leads ultimately to a much more vibrant economy. This is again getting back to my comparative political economy at London School of Economics, much better than other systems where people become mired down in the status quo. And we may complain today about, people may complain today about, oh, there were too many billionaires and multimillionaires in the United States. But this has happened before, and it changes. Um,
Yeah.
and I think
And
that's, yeah.
I think one of the things that I've seen develop over the last 30 years, and maybe it was already much more so in the US, but it has sort of, gone across the Atlantic to the UK and Europe, and maybe the rest of the world, is the professional players in our space. A space that used to be dominated by banks. Banks have certain restrictions in, taking the keys and then, enforcing on their collateral, yes, but they can't sort of run other businesses. But if you have distressed investors, it opens up, I guess, a box of opportunities as to how you restructure. And if you have a secondary market where, people that are involuntarily in a situation can actually exit, and sophisticated investors that are voluntarily investing in that situation can take a position, the dynamic completely changes, and the options to actually restructure change as well. And the US was obviously the front runner in that development that spread across the world. So maybe that is also a reason why, the rescue culture in the US is so prominent for anybody outside of the US, because that started much earlier on your side of the pond.
Yeah, I think that is the case. I'm not sure whether that, see, I think of it as actually being rooted in the ability to sell debt and develop a market and for somebody else to step in. So, having done a lot of real estate work in the 1990s and represented a lot of clients who would buy a pool of loans from the bank and then work it out. Some of them worked them out with a hammer, other than worked them out in a much more gentle way, some with some combination. You had that debt trading, an ability for people to move around in their positions and banks to unload their positions, that I think led to a divergent group holding the debt. So Peter, we're both fellows in INSOL, and in what year was it now? Many decades.
2008, 2009, when Lehman
2000.
collapsed, we were in Shanghai.
So, but in 2008, we sat in a classroom in Leiden, and I landed there as, a younger American lawyer with more hair that was less white. And I sat in this class where the folks who were teaching us, including professionals from Europe, and I was there as one of the few Americans in the group, were talking about how banks, and it was this bank mentality, acted as a club, and here are the rules that people are supposed to observe in a workout. And I was like, whoa, this isn't what's happening in my practice. This is a little bit English and gentlemanly, and that's not quite as efficient. And I can literally remember sitting there in that classroom thinking, that's not the way we're doing it. And it was because the debt was moving and was landing in the hands of entrepreneurs who would start a fund and would be looking for the most efficient way to solve the problem. And that continues to occur today. And I think it's accelerated with the growth of private credit, which is Europe and other parts of the world continue to be a bit behind on it, obviously
But
catching up.
again, Rick, don't you think that goes back to mentality? Because,
It does.
it was very much relationship driven. It was maybe also feeling like, personal failure, and then, embarrassment, shame, all these things sort of are, they're related maybe to financial distress, but ultimately it's also just, like an illness of individuals. it happens. It's in the life cycle, and you need to be able to deal with it, and you need to be able to deal with it professionally, and you can't take it too personally, or it can't paralyze you forever. And yeah, if you're full of shame, and you can't talk about it, and you don't want to talk about it, and if you do talk about it, you're going to go to debtors prison or something akin to that, and it's the end of your normal life, then obviously this is not something you want to deal with. And I guess, with banks, and the relationships, and, sticking with the client, maybe that was at least not as entrepreneurial as, the US was already doing, with new players coming in the market and actually agreeing to sort of, take the debt off their hands and open up opportunities to restructure.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Was it better um, when, if I were the debtor and I went to the country club and I were seeing my banker and I had to hide my problem because my banker would then have problems who my kids were hanging out with, and so we all hid it. Was that better than facing up to the music more quickly, and sort of the result of having distressed investors come in who may hammer you as a borrower? I'm not. I don't think the old culture of hiding it um, is efficient and solved as many problems. I think it hid them for more time. And, maybe there's even a root of what actually happened with Lehman in this, and that the old culture is part of what caused the problem. But you still see that, right? There's a very human reaction to failure, and I deal with this, every day in some way. But every week or two, I'm sitting down with an entrepreneur or a business person who is calling me too late and saying, I can't meet payroll in 2 months, or I can't meet payroll on Friday, or I didn't meet payroll last Friday. Why does somebody call when the problem is so bad? It's that very human desire to avoid admitting a failure and the external reaction to a failure, calling your peers who may have invested, your in-laws who might have put money into the company early, or your friends that you went to college with who put money into the company early. We may have a better culture here in the United States where people can start over, but there is still that human, and I'm not sure shame is the right word, but that human negative reaction to conceding your failure and dealing with your failure, that still exists. Then, of course, Peter, what makes our job so interesting is there is some percentage of the people we deal with who are just pure sociopaths, right? We've had them as clients, and we've been across the table from them. And there is no shame. There is no fear. There's just the application of mean leverage and deceit. And
That's right. But again, the flip side of that is that gets the headlines,
it
and for
does.
the man and woman in the street, that's what they associate with financial distress, because that's what they read. But it exists, and sometimes it exists in a very, very big way. Madoff, Enron. We have a list of
Yes.
FTX that we now have seen.
Yeah.
But there is still a very large, part of financial distress that has nothing to do with fraudsters. But the fraudsters also have a huge impact on the view that people have about financial distress, and maybe also the policy decisions that governments feel they need to make to appease the voters, which sometimes is difficult for people like you and me, who deal with this day in, day out, need the tools to actually do what we do. But no use having a great law and great tools if the mentality is not there and it's not used. We can't do much with it, can we?
So this is an issue that I'll just call them the sociopaths, and some may not be sociopaths. Some may be just people who may be what I would consider, with a Judeo-Christian background, immoral. Some may be from a culture where, it's okay to lie to the foreigner. I mean,
Yeah.
there are people that we all deal with in our job who approach business with a different level of honesty, a different level of what the written contract means than many of us have, right? And that they're different. And I spend an inordinate amount of my time um, counseling people in those situations, but also counseling people in their contractual relationships on how to avoid those situations.
Mm.
Whether it's with their partners who they're entering into an agreement full of hope, I say, well, you know, what could happen if it goes sideways? Or I'll get a call from one of my business lawyers. And you need to be thinking about those issues and those extremes so that you can prepare for them. And then if they do happen, deal with them. And what you find is on the front end of transactions, people don't want to even imagine that the bad things could happen. And frankly, when the first problem begins to emerge, nobody wants to go home and say that bet the career positive decision that I made next year. Um, I'm not sure I trust Bernie. I mean, the degree to which people continue to trust when they saw potential problems, or they didn't see them because human perception leads you to avoid seeing them, is just extraordinary.
But again, it's why I think for lawyers like ourselves, it's also good to at least have some experience in, transactional and good times as
Oh yeah,
opposed to bad times, because it's natural, right? If you come with the most extreme possibility, negatively on a situation, because it might happen, or we need to think about it, it kills the atmosphere of doing a deal, and nothing gets done. So
that's right.
that's why they don't want to have the pure litigator around the table when a business deal is discussed. Because if you come from a legal perspective with this outlandish negative situation, um, it really is testing on the trust of doing business. And again, that goes back to maybe the beginning of our conversation. A good lawyer, shouldn't be too legal about things. He or she should also have a sense of, the business issues and counsel. So how do you match those two with each other? Because again, you don't want to be the person that kills the deal because rightly or wrongly, you're just discussing a scenario that could happen. And in your practice, it has happened a lot of times because that's when the deal comes to you, right? So that is obviously
Yeah.
your reality.
All right, so I'm going to bring it back to the very beginning of our conversation, which is sailing. So,
Ah,
what I like to do is race across an ocean, like to Bermuda, and I like to do it without crew, with just one other person on the boat with me. I don't do it single-handed. And there is risk. And do you leave a sail up at night when a storm may come? And you're constantly evaluating risk, but you're trying to win, which means you would take the risk. And in business, our clients need to take risk because they won't make money. And my job is not to sit there in the room and throw risk at the other side when we're negotiating on the front end of a transaction, or it could be the end of a distressed transaction, which is a new healthy transaction. My job is to cost effectively spot where the risk could be, negotiate defenses to it. So that could be, like when I'm sailing, we're going to stand watch every 10 minutes instead of every hour at night, or some change, right? In the business transaction, you're balancing when do we assume risk or not. You don't want to blindly, especially large companies. Nobody wants to say I didn't evaluate the risk. But as a lawyer in the room, you need to have the personality where you're getting the deal done at the same time you're spotting the risk and mitigating it where you can cost effectively. And that constant risk assessment done very quickly and affordably, frankly, with a smile so that the other side doesn't think that you're being a jerk and obstructionist, and you're easy to deal with. And that is where the repetitions in transactions, having a good reputation matters. And frankly, I want my whole team to have a good reputation as people who get things done, at the same time as I have a team for people who will fight to the end if somebody on this other side does something wrong, so that you solve it. And so I think you have to learn to evaluate the risk, mitigate the risk, and frankly do it with a smile and ease so that it gets done. That's how I
yeah.
approach it. And it really, I think about this all the time when I am racing and taking on risk, that how do I win and but still survive? And you can't be paralyzed by risk avoidance.
No, that's right. So maybe going back to, the bankers and the distressed investors,
Yeah.
and your point, I'm not sure, which one is necessarily better. Are you, based on your experience, afraid that the distressed investors may push it too much on the other side, and sort of, take it too much as a business transaction and ignore, all the other sort of emotions that are there? Or maybe the bankers were too much, empathetic relationship and what have you, and not enough business. So do we need to find sort of the middle ground between the two in order to, have the perfect system of rescue?
Oh, I don't know. I think the bankers have lost this one in the terms of what you're thinking, to be honest. It doesn't even occur to me anymore that exists very much. I mean, the relationships still exist even among hedge funds, vulture investors, so to speak, right? To use a somewhat derogatory term,
Yeah.
where some of them care about their reputation, some don't. Some want the reputation as not having a decent bone in their body because they think that allows them to win. I think the old school banker view is much rarer, and I say that is I think what you're talking about is what I talked about in that class in Leiden, sort of the set rules, everybody will behave that way.
Yep.
But reputation is still a reputation, in my view, for integrity is still really important because we deal even globally as restructuring advisors that deal with matters around the world. It's a very small community. I mean, maybe it's a few thousand people, and at the top, maybe it's 500 people, right? We see the same people again and again, and you're going to see them. And if you have a reputation as somebody who can't be trusted, then it's going to be much more expensive for somebody to deal with you. By the same token, if you have a reputation as a pushover, well, people are going to take advantage of that and know it. And so you have to have that balance, in my view, between integrity and firmness, and frankly, being somebody that people want to deal with and know they can deal with and trust.
So what would then for you be mastering your trade as a lawyer in special sits? Uh, um, what characteristics do you need to have as a lawyer?
So I had a mentor and a former leader of our group who said that you had to have the ability to rock and roll, which is kind of this intangible that if you knew Howard Gornier had worked with him, and he was head of the firm when we were much smaller and less global, head of the team when we were smaller and less global. But it's that ability to deal with things that come up by surprise, find creative solutions, move easily in chaotic, crazy situations, which everyone is not genetically suited for, and articulate them in difficult situations. Right? There are people who will come into the difficult situation and their response is to yell and scream. I went the first 20 years of my career without ever raising my voice. I had one unfortunate case where I had a lawyer on the other side who screamed all the time. And one day decided I would try screaming back. And I was horrified that it worked. And it was a very sad day that I realized there were times I might actually have to yell, but I still very rarely will raise my voice. But you can still be, firm in how you deal with it and able to articulate in tough situations and stay calm. And that's a different skill set than your typical transactional lawyer, and even than your typical litigator would have. And frankly, I think it takes a different set of intelligence than you might need just to litigate, or you might need just to do a business deal and do a transaction. And I will often watch, and I'm sure you've had this experience where a colleague will, from the healthy side, will join you in a discussion and see craziness on the other side, financial chaos. And then after the call, they'll say to you, like, how do you do that work? And it's because it's really difficult. Like when somebody calls, I mean, at the smaller level, when someone calls me, as they have a couple of times in the past month, and say, I can't meet payroll, I'm going to need to lay people off. The contractor in some Asian country is going to take everything and I'm going to lose it all. I mean, that's an extraordinarily level of stress, someone else's stress that you're helping them with on a regular basis. And the team members that I'm looking for are people who can handle that calmly and really intelligently, and be a counselor to that individual at the same time deal with the people who are screaming at them. So that's what I think Howard meant by the ability to rock and roll, and I don't really know how to better define it, because it's a group of intangible traits that you need to work in really messy situations. Um, I found that I enjoy it, and I'm not quite sure why I'm wired that way, but I'm wired that way.
So, maybe we can go back to the start of your career. You were introduced to financial distress, almost on the client side, and then had an opportunity to, to actually do it also within the law firm. But
Yeah.
was that something that was your full practice, or was it just, one of the things you do? I think what I've seen over, the last 30 years is that special sits is actually, a specialization on its own, while it used to be, I guess, a bolt-on to other things, right? Litigation, finance, corporate. Is that how you started out, doing bankruptcy almost full time, or was it actually something that only over time became more and more your practice? And was your practice initially more regional and national? And when did it sort of become cross-border? Because we're
Sure.
both sort of focused on especially cross-border situations. And the world obviously has become smaller, and it's much easier for, a relatively small situation to be cross-border because, yeah, a lot of things don't stop at the border anymore.
Right. So as I explained, I joined the firm not knowing that this was the area of law that I wanted to be in, and it was largely a creditor rights practice, representing some large regional banks and workouts, and even smaller workouts. So 6 months into my job at then Peabody and Brown, the firm hired a lawyer who came from was Bank Boston, became Bank of America. And this lawyer had been doing in-house commercial collections, and he was hired as counsel. And he came into my office and literally deposited like 150 boxes of commercial collection cases that range from $25,000 for an individual on a personal guarantee to a few $1 million bankruptcy
So
matter.
this is debt collection. This
This is
is
debt. This is debt collection, but some of it had maybe 10% of it was bankruptcy restructuring. And of course, I'm a second year lawyer, and our bankruptcy was then within litigation. And so I'm sitting around litigators. And well, I cursed this pile of cases when I was living it, and it wasn't what I envisioned I would be doing. What it gave me that was extraordinary was 2/3 of those cases led to my going into court and obtaining injunctions or arguing small restructuring matters. So as a first, second, third, fourth year lawyer, I gained a wealth of courtroom experience that frankly many partners at AmLaw 100 firms still don't have in my first 3 years, and a comfort in the courtroom that it's very, very hard to get. And that then later led to I had sort of what I still think of as a transformative bankruptcy experience, where I'm at a cash collateral hearing, which is when you file a U.S. bankruptcy, you have to ask permission to use the cash. And I'm there representing a minor creditor, and the lead lawyer for the company, who had previously been a creditor's rights lawyer, basically turned to lender after lender that he had to deal with and said, well, we're going to try our case this afternoon. And I watched some of the most prominent members of the Massachusetts bankruptcy bar melt because they didn't know how to try cases. And I was like, that is not going to be me. I am going to be equally fearless to try a case. And so I worked on developing to come back to your question, I worked really hard on developing the litigation skills. And it led to me being staffed on some large litigation matters, working with some extraordinary trial lawyers, and just a comfort and a fluidity in the courtroom that I continue to use today because when I approach a very difficult business situation, I think both like a business lawyer looking for the solution, and I think like a litigator, how can I apply leverage to the other side and use the court process? So that might literally be where somebody else wouldn't think of it, and I've done this twice. I will start a receivership action. I won't move it forward, but I will start a receivership action and leave it pending. And the other side all of a sudden realizes they are potentially mired and have to report out a piece of litigation because I'm seeking a receiver and in the discovery and the process, et cetera. So we started in the litigation side, and my practice was litigating commercial collection cases. I did some bank regulatory cases where I worked with people. I did the dissolution of a law firm, just a variety of the litigation side and fighting over things. And then as time went on and as the firm grew, it led to more traditional bankruptcy work. And if you take the longer view, what has really happened is our bank clients ended up in fewer and fewer deals. And we realized that company side work, internal firm clients would be in financial trouble and be like, whoa, we just cleared conflicts. There's no bank on the other side. It's a private fund. And this opportunity for us to take our middle market, lower middle market clients and others and actually represent them on the company side. And I jokingly say that I hired 2 lawyers who taught me to be a debtors lawyer, who had worked at one of the largest firms in New York with really good debtor experience, are at Nixon Peabody now. And they really did teach me to be a debtor side, company side lawyer. So that today, that is 2/3 of my practice, I would say, is representing companies and only 1/3 creditors.
And what's the difference? Because again, maybe tying it to the question of what does success look like in a special sits situation? I guess it matters whether you're on the creditor side or on the debtor side.
Yeah. So success, I'll sort of give you one instance is a group of investors in a skilled nursing chain, nursing homes, came to me. They had gotten together and invested for investors. And it turned out that one of them had engaged in some really bad behavior. And they had all signed personal guarantees. And we went to the landlord, who was also a lender, and the 3 people who were quite honest, laid it all on the table, came to me for advice, and I said, let's lay it on the table and let's propose a restructuring plan through Chapter 11 with your landlord lender. And of course, I said to the landlord lender that the key to this is when we get this through and we solve this problem and rescue the business as opposed to leaving you with a liquidation, you're going to give my folks personal guarantees. You're going to tear them up. And those guarantees are torn up. And one of the principals in that group calls me every Thanksgiving and thanks me for, saving his house, allowing him to put his kids through college, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, that's success, right? I'm actually able to help people, and that makes me feel better. And we've rescued the business and preserved value in the business, and the business is continuing to employ people.
But it is
That's
bespoke to each situation, right? It's very difficult to
totally.
sort of always say success is this or success is that. Here, I guess, the big thing was to get rid of the personal guarantees.
Yeah, to get rid of the personal guarantees and to save the business, and of course, with that came saving hundreds of jobs, and that was a smaller one with a particularly thankful client. I do it frequently for larger businesses, and that's how I think of the success. And every client comes to you with a different goal. It may be I want to divest myself of this business that has tort liability. It may be I'm worried about avoiding liability in the future. And we engage in, what you and I affectionately call LME, liability management exercises, at the larger level. Or it might
And
just be get as much money out of somebody else's bankruptcy if you're representing a creditor. In other cases, it may be get some money out, but keep my contractual relationship going forward.
But liability management exercises require, obviously, flexibility within the documents to do stuff, right? And I guess that has been the case in recent years with very loose, if any, covenants around. And it's something that I guess we've always done. Maybe didn't call it liability liability management exercises, but you always look at the finance documents to see what the baskets are and whether there is still, headroom and whether you can do something under, the existing documents. If you can't, obviously you try to sort of amend them. But if you can, then you can do them without actually asking for consent.
Yeah, or you threaten some litigation for those in the gray area and work it out in the back room.
Yeah.
Right.
Because that is your favorite, with your litigation background,
My
it
second
is
favorite
just,
sport.
yeah, it's part of the sport. It's part of the sport.
But
Um,
I say that, but I also acknowledge and regularly say that that is the backdrop and that is my approach, that could happen. But the goal is to avoid it because it's ridiculously expensive, and 99% of the time we avoid it.
yeah, but it's the stick that you need to have to make
Yeah.
people focus, and hopefully you don't need to use the stick, but they need to know that the stick is there. Otherwise, people will just not take it seriously.
Yeah. So you were talking earlier about what in the U.S. system works, and I have a theory that actually what works to solve business problems is to get people in the same room. And the U.S. bankruptcy process, in fact, works. Well, it carries a lot of cost because it forces resolution. We all know that court litigation cases settle on the courthouse steps. Well, you are dragged in a U.S. Chapter 11 to the courthouse steps repeatedly, and the company has the ability to drag people to the courthouse steps repeatedly. And sort of one of my theories of how to resolve business disputes and litigation and bankruptcies is to create the event where you bring everybody together. And whether that's a mitigation or it's the deposition of the principal on the other side or it's an actual trial, you've got to get people together. And many times they're struggling hard to avoid coming together, or one side doesn't want to come to the table. And so I'm always looking for that tool to force them to the table.
So what's then the role in that of the bankruptcy judge? Because again, it's a unique feature, I think, of the U.S. How much of I guess active role usually bankruptcy judges have in the UK. Obviously, they're very important as well, but different in a very different way than the U.S. Is that a good thing, a bad thing? How do you actually use that in the best way possible?
So especially in Delaware, Texas, New York, and even we have a good bench in Massachusetts. The judges know that bankruptcy serves that conciliatory process. So as a debtor's lawyer or a creditor's lawyer, if I hint at the need for people to be brought together, because I think something can happen, I've never had a judge miss that cue and not order mediation or order people to meet and confer or order somebody to show up, or schedule a hearing that on the timetable that will help, because I think that the sophisticated practitioners who then become judges know that that's part of the process,
And
and it
is the
works.
bankruptcy judge the one with the most power in the whole restructuring?
Um, no, I would say the debtor's lawyer is in terms of the ability to drive the process. Judge Sanchi would often, and still I think would often, talk about that when he was on the bench. He would say to lawyers, "Remember, I only have one view of what's going on," because the judge is not there for most of what happens outside of the courtroom scene or the negotiation scene. But the really good judges know that they can drive that and they can force it. And so I'll give you an example. I also continue to do some regular state court litigation, and I had a discovery conference with the judge, or it was a contested hearing this week with a judge, and the judge forced us into a breakout room. This was a Zoom hearing to deal with the discovery issue. We had one issue, whether a foreign individual who owned a piece of my client could be deposed in the United States. And so I'm like, no, we're going to have to go find him wherever he is in the world. I, representing the company in the US, am not going to bring that person to the United States. The other side wanted to apply leverage and get him deposed. So that issue had to go before the judge. Judge came out my way. I was really happy with our briefing, totally understood the law, and was just hammering the other side. And then the judge says, this case is ready for trial. I'm so sorry I gave you any extensions, because we had asked for extensions in part to accommodate my summer vacation. And the judge is getting upset that he has given us extensions. And the judge then says, tell me about any other discovery issues that are going to come up. And of course, I have a couple on my own side. And the judge turns and begins to hammer me. And I've won what I came to win. And I am now getting completely hammered because I want to take discovery on a law firm. And it was very, very funny. And then as part of this, I'm explaining complicated issues of attorney-client privilege to the judge and why I need to depose this law firm. And he just interrupts me and says, you know what? I want Hemingway. I don't want Dostoevsky. Cut to the point. We're going to get this case over with, and we're going to try this case. And in that way, the judge is managing the docket and achieving justice by forcing it to go quickly. And that is a judge managing a dispute in a very aggressive and I think totally appropriate way, and telling the lawyers and hinting to the lawyers where it's going to go. And the best bankruptcy judges do that. They manage with subtlety like that. And that's what actually I think leads to disputes being resolved, because part of the injustice in the U.S. system is how long things can drag.
And maybe that is also the reason why you see, and it's a very topical subject, ADR, done by former judges or experienced practitioners, because as you say, the court system in the US is a way of resolving disputes. In the in the UK and in continental Europe, you can also have an IP that has a role and has tools and can, as an officer of the court, be the mediator to get things done. But it could also be just he could be a player or she could be a player, and you need to bring an external person to sort of sort out the issues. Because ultimately, as you say, there are many stakeholders around the table. You can use litigation to maybe get people to focus. But if you're too one-sided and too aggressive, then nothing is going to happen, right? Because then you end up in a very expensive litigation, and it's sort of black or white. The best way, obviously, usually is to find common ground and avoid going one extreme or the other extreme.
Yeah, but you're dealing with people who don't want to leave anything on the table, and frankly, this is where I think shame actually plays in. Nobody wants to do a deal where they're made to look like a fool in the future. So
saving face is very important as well.
It's very important. And I advise clients about that a lot. I was like, let's think about what their concerns are. We can't do a deal where the value pops and you dance on the table and they look like idiots. They're not going to let us do that deal. They're too smart. So how do we protect them and the upside? And so, let's give them some stock options to be the way we often will do it, right? Or something like that. And that's getting to exactly what you said, find that fair middle ground. And then you have to apply an immense amount of creativity. And that's when I love what I'm doing. So, I'll spend a day learning about the tax issue in the matter, and I'll talk to the business partners about how we might do some creative structure. Maybe it's a profits interest instead of equity or whatever it is. And then you're figuring out how to resolve the litigation, and you might have plaintiffs' lawyers who are suing the company, and you're dealing with a different creditor. And that's when our job as a restructuring lawyer, bringing in all the pieces together, is really challenging and really fun.
Yeah. So you have these anti-embarrassment features that you can bring in to sort things out. But again, you also may have to deal with maybe the new players that are too business focused and not wanting to leave anything on the table, and ignoring the fact that there's also emotions involved, humans involved, and you need to deal with those as well, because not everything is done strictly economically, right?
No, that's right. It's your own client's emotions. It might be one partner in your client group's emotions, and then the emotions of the people on the other side. And then what is always fascinating is what is really driving the other side. And often I won't know what that is, and I'm searching for it so that I can find the solution. And that comes back to where
Yep.
being a good professional is, and having a good professional reputation is I will often find those answers by having a drink or a cup of coffee with the lawyer or the financial advisor on the other side, who will then explain what's really going on, because they trust that I will work in the appropriate way with the information. Not that they're giving away privileged information or something they shouldn't, but through body language you learn. And we both know, and every business person knows, many a problem's been solved over dinner or a drink.
And so the financial advisors, do you think that their role is widely different from the lawyer in special sits, or is it actually, a similar sort of role that both have? And many times you need to closely work together to achieve, whatever can be achieved for your client.
Yeah, so I think it's an invaluable role because very few clients have the finance team or the creativity to think about how to truly solve the problem. And so some of my best friends are people who work as financial advisors. And I think you deliver value by working together. Where I see a tension sometimes will be a bank imposed or lender imposed financial advisor being put into a situation that may come with a different agenda, even though they're hired by your client technically. And that is one of the issues that we have to work with. But
Yeah.
again, it comes from maintaining good relationships, and you and I both, and we're both in INSOL. We know that maintaining good relationships with a wide variety of financial advisors, even though we're lawyers, is really important because you're
Yeah.
working
Yeah.
with these
No,
people again
absolutely.
and again.
So you were saying, it started off doing, well, debt collection, recovery, enforcing security. Then you became more involved in the debtors practice, because there were no banks on the other side, no conflicts. You could actually represent your own clients. Um, how did it become cross-border, and what is sort of your experience with doing things outside of your own jurisdiction and having to deal with, I guess, different systems, different mentalities, different
Sure.
rules?
Yeah. So I should sort of finish the story about and talk about Nixon Peabody, what's now Nixon Peabody, for a minute, because it's intertwined. So Peabody and Brown, which I joined in 1995, was a 120 lawyer firm with offices in New England, but also an office in Washington, D.C., where one of my former partners actually wrote the law on tax credits. And for low income housing, which of course now we see in solar and renewable and are a big part of the practice. But really a regional firm, very much New England regional firm. And then a few years later, we merged with Nixon Hargrave, an upstate New York firm, a New York City firm, which had represented a lot more Fortune 500 companies, some Kodak, Bausch and Lomb, some of the real big upstate New York powerhouses. And that doubled the size of the firm, which to me as a third year associate was kind of shocking. This isn't what I signed up for, but ended up leading to some tremendous opportunities and growth that I wouldn't have stayed with a small regional firm. Few years later, a group of lawyers joined us that had a corporate trust practice representing bond trustees, one of the preeminent practices. Joined us, and they then brought and together acquired some real large capital markets distressed work, which I had not yet done. And the first matter I was brought in on was Calpine, which was a real
A
large
big
energy
one.
company. And I can remember sitting at my kitchen table in my small home at the time saying, oh my goodness, this has a B in front of it for $1 billion at stake. And I've been dealing with millions. But the issues are, very much the same: secured creditor rights, cash collateral. And I just killed myself on that case, rose to the occasion, I like to think, banged heads with Kirkland and Ellis, and had a great time doing it on the creditor side, and enmeshed myself within our bond trustee work group. They liked my work. And I began working with them more and more often, and have over the years. And I'm part of that group, so it's a significant part of my practice, although defaults are down a bit now. That then led to a cross-border matter.
So maybe
Yeah, go ahead.
just to clarify, a bond trustee is the trustee that actually represents all the holders of bonds that have been issued by the issuer, right? So
That's right.
it's an institution in in a form of financing that is a capital markets transaction.
That's exactly right. So a company can borrow money directly from a bank, and I'll use the company as the example, or the company can turn to the public markets to borrow money. You're borrowing money in the public markets. You can't have a direct relationship with each individual, each mom and pop. So how does that kind of borrowing take place? Well, the Trust Indenture Act in the United States, this really old, archaic law, says we will have these things called indenture trustees, who will sit in the middle and have certain relationships with the people who actually lend the money. And then the trustee deals with the company. And it's a very, I'll say boring, although we've got dozens and dozens of lawyers who deal with the front end before a default occur, and they would probably tell me I shouldn't call it boring. But to most people, the pre-default is not that interesting, because the trustee is a middle person largely. Collects paper, processes the money. Very important role. But upon default, the trustee, under U.S. law, becomes responsible for dealing with the company that's defaulted and figuring out what to do. And that is usually not that exciting for the lawyers involved. It's important work, but often the holders will direct the trustee. I've had several large cases where the holders did not actually step up and direct, in which case the lawyer for the bond trustee, the indenture trustee, with the indenture trustee team and a financial advisor that you'll hire to work with the indenture trustee, are essentially representing the holders and truly representing the holders, who may themselves not want the private information and may be trading in the background. In those
Yeah,
cases,
and maybe what we should say as well is that not all bond trustees want to actually deal with a defaulted situation. So usually, that's the time where maybe a successor bond trustee comes in,
that's
who
right.
has more of an appetite to actually deal with, a lot different scenario than when everything is calm and sunny. All of a sudden, the waters are a lot more choppy, and you need to actually be able to, do things and not be paralyzed. So it may be an opportunity for a new type of bond trustee to come in.
Yeah, or the existing trustee will have conflicts. But what we
Yep.
see is that many of the existing trustees realize that managing defaults can be very, very lucrative, and they're successoring them out less often if they're able to hang on to them. And in
Yep.
the industry today, many of our bond trustee clients are building up their shops to be able to, in a position to keep them,
Yep.
keep the
And it
default.
used to be with the banks, but now they're, independent shops that have it.
Yeah, some are independent, but some are still actually with banks. We have,
Yep.
we represent almost all the large U.S. trustees in one way or another, and there several of them are banks. So that work raised the sophistication. In the early 2000s, really raised the sophistication level of my practice, from being a regional practice to being a capital markets practice, and it then led to cross-border default in the mid 2000s, and I it was not long after Chapter 15 had been passed, enacted in the U.S., the model law, and it was a Canadian proceeding. And I worked through it, but realized I had a lot more to learn about cross-border insolvency, and that I really liked it. And the firm was growing. We were looking at developing a China office and some offices abroad. And so I went looking literally on the internet for, how do I go and learn more about cross-border insolvency. And that led me to the INSOL Fellowship Program,
Oh,
where I
wow.
convinced the
Yep.
firm to send me, and it ruined a summer of studying intensely and learning a lot with some great travel and making good friends like you, Peter.
Yeah. Well,
And I,
no, likewise. That was, yeah, it was the pilot class. So we were all the guinea pigs. But I guess, now looking back, it's been a great program. And yeah, it's sort of created an organization within an organization in INSOL International.
and it's as you look back on a career, it's important to and continuing. I'm on the board of INSOL International now, and I've always viewed professional organizations and involvement with them as a really important way to know others in the industry and to continue to learn and stay on the cutting edge and to give back to the profession. And so that has led me to be involved in INSOL over the years, teaching some of the fellowship class, and of course now on the board of INSOL. Um, and it's been great. And what it has done, Nixon Peabody is not a capital markets firm the way, the top 5 firms in the United States are. We have lawyers that do that work. But we have a lot of middle market and lower middle market clients. But increasingly, those clients have subsidiaries and contracts abroad. And so I've become the magnet within the firm for problems involving cross-border insolvency. And that could be, and this led to the growth of the work in addition to the bond trustee work. Um, it could be, I've licensed my intellectual property in Africa, and I now may have a South African insolvency proceeding. What can happen? Or how do I structure it on the front end for a really complicated global intellectual property licensing issue if somebody should go insolvent? And then the eternal question of where could the insolvency be? And then I've done a fair amount of work in China. And then I have 3 or 4 matters now where U.S. companies that are having financial issues have subsidiaries scattered around the world. And so how do we manage those potential insolvencies abroad, or in many cases avoid insolvency abroad so that we don't have to have a filing?
So what is your experience then, elevating the practice from regional, national to, cross-border? What is the additional layer of complexity that you sort of have to deal with then when it becomes cross-border?
So it's a couple of things. So I'll never be a substantive expert in the law of all of the jurisdictions where my clients have problems. So a really key part of what I do is, how do I find individuals in each country really quickly who I'm comfortable working with? And I do that
Yep.
through my INSOL network, my INSOL fellowship network. But the firm is also having decided that we're not going to open our own offices around the world. We're involved in an organization called Teralex. And Teralex is essentially a network of law firms in every country in the world with a professional staff. And Teralex was actually founded by one of our former men, by Nixon Peabody, 30 years ago or more. And I'm co-leader of the bankruptcy group of Teralex. And so through my work with Teralex, I have a network of lawyers. So if you were to call me and say I have a problem in XYZ country, within an hour, I'll have a name of somebody who I've met or one of my partners has met who we're comfortable working with on an insolvency issue. And I bring that expertise to bear and coordinate it. And then,
So how do you deal with that? Because I think if we look at the legal market and we look again what has happened, uh, um, the firms have either become, very small or very large, and there's not much in between. There are some of them in between.
yeah,
And what do you think? Because talking about the large law firms, and I've been in large law firms myself, I think the challenge there is, how do you actually, within your practice group, create a cohesive group that actually, pursues matters together, as opposed to being like, a subset of little islands and little, kingdoms and fiefdoms that do their things on their own. And, how do you manage that if, you have such a large organization? Obviously, your practice group within the other practice groups, but also, if you're the co-leader of your practice group and you're in, 40 jurisdictions, That's difficult. I guess, question to you is the same, if there is a cross-border insolvency and it has, various jurisdictions involved, how do you build the team that actually can do it, and how do you manage that?
Yeah. So again, a lot of, I'm not competing with Kirkland or Skadden or Weil for a multi-billion-dollar or trillion-dollar cross-border insolvency, right? Or Sullivan and Cromwell. There are monster cases where you need a massive international firm to actually handle it, right? And that's not Nixon Peabody. But for a mid-market or a lower middle market firm, $1 billion, $2 billion company, or even smaller, right? We handle matters for companies that are $100 million companies. We have the team that we can field, and it comes back to the genius of the original merger between Nixon Hargrave and Peabody and Brown back in the 1990s. And the decision was made then that we would have national practice groups. And we would not have business lawyers in state X and business lawyers in state Y. But no, they invested the money to create national teams. So when we go hiring now, we're hiring people to come in and join a national team. And you're interviewing with a team leader or a practice group leader who is leading a national practice, or even an international practice, because we do have teams in Asia. So that structure, internal structure, which is compensation structure all the way through, drives the teamwork, and it drives how we work on a daily basis. So, I'll give you the example of, and in the restructuring group, because we're a relatively small group and it's up and down, we're not 50 restructuring lawyers who sit on our hands when the economy is booming. We're a group of really a dozen core restructuring type lawyers, another 15 or 20 who do insolvency matters, know that we're around, but are probably off litigating or doing healthy M&A deals when the economy is doing well. But we're structured nationally and we're scattered nationally. And frankly, we've worked remotely with each other for a decade. So when the pandemic came before it, people joke that I didn't actually work in the Boston office. And it was completely seamless for me to work from home because I'd already been working from multiple offices. And we continue that way. And I work on a daily basis with people around the country, and we're organized as a team. And so that leads to, and I think the undercurrent of your question is the bad behavior you see in law firms. And it actually bleeds to what clients see in many instances, which is competing between lawyers.
Mm.
I won't say we never have that, but we approach the market as a team, and our management from the top down and our compensation structure encourage team behavior, and long-term thinking. And that is why I'm actually still here, because it makes it a more pleasant place to work. And it's why I didn't imagine that I would stick with a large law firm originally, but I've been really pleasantly surprised. And now I'm part of making sure that culture continues, and it's great.
Excellent. You mentioned China. China obviously is, you can't ignore China, or you can do it at your own peril. We have some quite, interesting geopolitics going on at the
We do.
moment, sort of zooming out. And it has quite an impact on business and also our business, I think. What are your thoughts about that, and about sort of the role of, I guess, law firms? Are we just neutral players and we'll take it as it comes? What do you think it means for our practice in particular? And China, I mean, you've had experience with them many years. Well, they're big and they're, special. What are sort of thoughts you have on how to actually, achieve things if China is involved?
Yeah. So it's different culturally than the United States, and you have to understand and respect that culture. Um, and I've been very fortunate in two ways. First, a variety of So Nixon continues to have an office in China, and one of my partners, David Chang, works out of Hong Kong and San Francisco and heads our China practice. And it was a decision that we would maintain a China practice was made over a decade ago. And so it's led to a lot of inbound work and an opportunity to work with Chinese investors coming to the United States, as well as an ability for us to facilitate outbound work. We're actually not doing the legal work on the ground in China, but it's given me a cultural awareness and an ability to handle that. And frankly, completely understand in the restructuring situation what it means if you have a Chinese subsidiary or you have a contract in China and you're a U.S. professional. I had one, and it comes up all kinds of surprising ways, but I had one example where I had a private lender. I'm working with a U.S. restructuring company that has a Chinese subsidiary, and I couldn't figure out why the lender kept giving us what we wanted. And I realized, in fact, that the fundamental issue was the lender would never take over a company that had a Chinese subsidiary with operations in China, and it was the perfect poison pill to a lender foreclosure. And that's just immense leverage, right? If you take that off the lender's table of cards to act on, you have a lot more power as the company in a restructuring. And who would have thought that it would be the perfect poison pill? And so it comes up in odd ways, but that also highlights the extreme difficulty of doing things on the ground. And, for repeatedly counseled executives, there are rules that are different in China, and your behavior in this process may impact your ability to ever travel to China. And we have to respect the way that they do business and that it's very different than what we do. And there are different expectations. And that probably comes with paying creditors differently or accepting that you can never go there again, which is their rules.
Yeah.
And Peter, I come at this also from I spent some time traveling there last year because I have a daughter who's was a Blakemore Fellow and spent the year studying and traveling there, and is hoping to go back as a journalist. So through her learning, I've benefited from a lot of additional cultural learning about how to do business there.
And the culture, I mean, we started our conversation with emphasizing trust being so important in
Yeah.
actually, achieving results in special situations. Is it more challenging if you deal with a culture that is, quite different from the US culture in China to get the level of trust that is required to actually achieve things?
It is, and it comes from making sure that you have the right people on the ground there, who have good reputations and know how to get things done and can advise you. I mean, I do not speak Mandarin. I'm not going to show up on the ground and begin to profess that I know how to work a boardroom in Beijing. That, but I do know how to find the right professionals to sit at my side or to go in my place and make things work and properly advise our companies. And having done it dozens of times, I think I'm in a pretty good situation to help be that intermediary. And certainly my partner, David Chang, is extraordinary at that.
Yeah.
How's that for dancing on a very difficult question, Peter? Right?
It is. It is. It is. I mean, it is an important and difficult question. I think that many law firms try to obviously, be neutral and deal with the substance as opposed to the politics that is
Yeah.
involved. But the politics is, has consequences for everybody, and it's a reality. You can't sort of, hide from it either.
Yeah, and I'm at a law firm with 600 to 700 lawyers, right? I'm not at a law firm that professes to be the global giant. And so I recognize and excel at our place in the middle market, lower middle market, which I think makes it different than it might be from other firms that need to take different positions.
So you sort of, laid out quite nicely how you started and sort of developed to where you are now,
Yeah.
being the leader of the restructuring team in a firm that is 600 odd lawyers and has also, a global reach, not with boots on the ground everywhere, but, a network as well. if you look at your career, did you set yourself goals and achieve them, or how did you sort of plan this out, or is it just, things happen?
So, um, m- when I was in law school, which I ended up doing because I had met my wife and I needed to figure out how I'd make a living, and I realized in London that a PhD in comparative government was not how I was going to support a family, and um, spent some time sailing. I ended up in law school, and then I've explained my route here. Um, but it led to this. I had from my time in London, and what led me to London was just a real interest in international practice. Um, and I had this sort of formative job interview where I met with a lawyer at a very large firm, who bragged to me in my third year of law school, bragged to me about how his travel case was always hanging and fully packed behind his door. And he would call his wife and say goodbye for a month and get on the plane. It's like, it just hit me. That was not what I wanted to have as a life with a family. And, Cheryl and I knew that we wanted to have children. We've had two daughters, and I've been able to balance being at a smaller firm where that wasn't the demands of practice and not going international work right away, um, a significant role more than a lot of lawyers in raising our kids. I actually worked part-time for a period of time. It was in
Wow,
2000.
that's
Um,
yeah.
so I sidelined the international, but I knew it was always there, and I was looking for the opportunity. And so, when the kids got older and the opportunity we talked about with INSOL and the cross-border work came up, I said, that's what I want to move back towards. And so it has been very methodical on developing that international expertise, which has led to really intellectually challenging and frankly, a lot of fun. I mean, I've been able to travel as part of my work with Terralex and building the network, as well as hands-on client work. I've just had some spectacular travel opportunities, and I've been really good at tagging on some fun travel, visiting Machu
So
Picchu,
you've
etc.
been, yeah,
Right?
you've been very careful in knowing that the practice can be all-consuming, and you can pay a price if
Can kill
you're
you.
not if you're not careful.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of examples around where the price is paid. So, is there a certain life philosophy that you have that you sort of, apply to your job, or has there, over the years become, a philosophy that the job has learned you that you apply to life? What are sort of, lessons that you've learned doing the job you're doing?
So I've been trying to sort out why I'm actually good at it, and has the job warped my mind, or was I born with the aptitude for what I'm doing? It comes back to when I described, I'll be on a really tough call with one of my partners, and then they'll look at me like I'm a lunatic for having dealt with it that way, and I realize there's something wrong with me. But I actually think it
That's what my wife always tells me. That there's something wrong with me. So,
yeah, and what's really funny, Peter, is thanks to Elon Musk and Starlink and my love of sailing and my kids having gone off to do their own things, I actually find that I can work from my boat some and be available. And so Cheryl, my wife, has been listening in on occasionally more of my one side of my work conversations, um, and she shakes her head at what I actually do.
what are you doing? How do you explain it? Right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what is the overall guiding philosophy? I'm not sure that there is one, but what I would say is I'm at a different point. I always said I'm going to get to the point when my kids are done with college that I can consider doing something else. I don't need to work in a large firm and work as hard as I've worked. And I kind of shocked myself as I began reflecting when they went off. And I was like, oh my goodness, I actually want to keep doing what I'm doing because I'm having a lot of fun at it. And I'm blessed by being in a place where it is not a 2,500 hour a year process.
And it shows, I think, that you like it. These things you can't actually, play, or you need to be a damn good actor to do it. But ultimately, you either, and the time you need to spend. If you
yeah.
don't like it, you're going to be a very sad person, aren't you?
Yeah, and I once, in connection with a collection case going back many years, deposed a partner who was one of the leading partners at one of the leading firms in the entire world. And he leaned across the table when I was asking about a transaction and screamed at me about how I didn't understand what it was like to work 2,800 hours a year, and pounded the table. And I could just see this 60-something-year-old type A personality's veins about to burst. And I'm like, oh my God, that firm and that job is going to kill him. And I
Yeah.
don't know where he is today or how he's doing, but I was like, well, that's not the balance in life. And this is a very hard profession to have balance in life. And of course, I cancel vacations and I like to win. I'm very, very competitive. And so
You're very competitive. Is that a trait that you need to have
I think you
to
do.
actually, make it
I
in
wouldn't,
this business?
I would never hire a restructuring lawyer that wasn't competitive, right?
Right.
Because if you're not looking to win, and that you got to know what winning is, right? And meet your clients, and it can't be reckless, I'm going to win, the sociopath kind of win. But you got to, it can be competitive, and there are competitive type A people in distressed investing. And I take the view that it's in some ways a sport, even though it's very, very serious for my clients. And I enjoy that competition just like I enjoy, racing sailboats in a really hard environment. And
So,
I'm not sure if
what
that'll change, but
what motivates you more? Is it encouragement or is it discouragement? People
oh,
saying,
it's encouraging.
"Rick, that's nothing you can do." Is that the flame that makes you do things, or is it actually people supporting you?
Peter, that's too personal of a question, right? All right. But I'll try to answer it anyway. So I am half Irish. And my partner, who had the great comment about you need to rock and roll, he also would say that there's Irish Alzheimer's, forget everything but a grudge, which would be the negative part, right? But I'm also half Italian, and a good chunk of that is Sicilian. And that is a very, very weird combination. And as I've gotten older, I've tried to figure out how those two cultures come together. But I would say, and this would be the Rick who now practices yoga, I'm trying to be the more positive. And the negative I kind of tend to ignore. But that may have
That's right.
changed over time.
Well, it's very interesting. I think one of the things that is, I mean, a sign of the time, but maybe it's always been there, is how important is it what others think about you, and how much does that drive you in what you're doing, right? Especially with sort of social media and everything around it. Obviously, it is important to keep an eye on what other people, think about you. But if you do that too much, then you're going to lose who you are yourself, and you need to have the confidence to actually do things that you believe are right, even if others may think that's not the case. And sometimes being a contrarian is actually what is required.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. And no, and so if I like sort of hone in on it, right, there's an Irish pessimism that definitely pervades the Irish side of my family and pervades the Irish culture in some ways, at least in the United States. And maybe it's a stereotype, but I actually think it's real. And that causes me to doubt and question to a degree that other people don't, and look for the negative. And that leads, I think it's partly led me to be a great lawyer, because I will see the problems that come up. And the other side of that, though, is I have developed, and maybe it's, the Italian gregariousness, I'm not sure, the ability to not let that handicap me. But it's this funny tension in my personality. And then there's sort of the Sicilian cutthroat instinct that I think is drifting around in there someplace.
that's that's an interesting combination for sure.
Who knows, Peter?
So,
You're psychoanalyzing me now, which is not fair.
well,
You didn't
look,
tell me that's what I was going
I
to
was
have
just
to do.
wondering, is that the reason why you're sort of a lifer within Nixon Peabody? Because again, these things, especially now, it seems a lot more unusual to have your whole career in one firm. I actually set out, thinking that would be me, but anything that I have planned in my life and my career has always gone different from what, I'd set out, and you sort of try to adapt and, and go with the flow. But I have a lot of respect for people who actually found, their home and stuck with it. And actually, your story is a very compelling one, where you started and where you are now, and the development that you had in between, and the fact that you were aware of the risks that are surrounding you, and you've been able to navigate it in a way that I think I have a lot of respect for.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. But I also know there's a lot of luck involved in it. And of course, there were days that I thought the grass might be greener on the other side and thought about doing something else. Those have passed, and I'm feeling just really lucky to have been practicing with a good group of people. And, there have been instances, and this is probably really decisive, right? There are instances where I thought maybe I'd have a better platform if I went someplace else. And I know at least in the short term, might have made more money if I went someplace else. But there have been also instances where I've seen management of the firm that I'm at, in particular when I was a younger lawyer and it mattered more and it was harder to stick up for yourself if you came across a difficult personality. I've seen people who were profitable thrown out of the firm because they behaved in ways that were inappropriate. And that's exercising the stick in a way, but it creates a culture where it's a better place to practice. And it's why I'm in the same place 30 years later, because the people I practice with have integrity and try to create a good place to work, which
That's great, because that is usually it comes hand in glove with people that are able to make the rain, right? If you can make the rain,
yes,
then there are no boundaries, or at least some people think that is the case, and that is usually very difficult to manage, right? Because
it is.
somebody is very successful in what they do, but their character and the way they sort of go about things is is not so great, then how do we deal with that?
Yeah, I want all the sociopaths on the outside. Right? You know what I mean? And anybody who's worked in a large law firm or a large competitive financial organization knows exactly what I mean, right?
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right.
And that's
So we've touched upon quite a bit. Maybe can we sort of look a little bit in the crystal ball and sort of see where things might go? We touched upon, I guess, the geopolitics that we're in now. We touched upon, I guess, new generations, the sort of social media impact. I can see it in my kids enormously. Hey, we're actually doing the podcast here. That is also new technology that we're doing. But AI, obviously, everybody talks about that as well. What are your views on what's the road ahead for us? And do you believe you're going to continue to play a role in this? And if so, how?
I'm working on my Harvey training and making use of AI and trying to sort through how the work will actually get done in the future. I'm quite firm that the judgment that I apply is not going to go away in the next 40 years of my career. See if that makes you smirk.
That's good. I like that too. I don't think, look, your career evolves, right? You're not going to be able to do what you were able to do at 25 if you're like 65.
Right.
But you just need to, adapt to the change. And I believe that, you and I, with life experience and professional experience, have still a lot to give. And if we like what we're doing and we can do it in circumstances where, we can actually still do it, then why not continue doing it?
Yeah, I don't actually think of myself as being that close to that transition. You must be older than I am, Peter, but
thank you very much. I'll take it as a compliment.
No, but I'll give you an example of how much things have changed, and I'm not the most technologically savvy person with the greatest internet presence, but I bloody got a call out of the blue because somebody found me on the internet last week for a real matter. I'm like,
wow, that's amazing.
See, that's your reaction. That's my reaction.
That is
and I'm
amazing.
like,
yeah, exactly.
all right.
Because
the team of people that I think of as overhead who are doing our social media presence, well, they're actually doing something worthwhile. And I've got to think more about it because that is the means of communication. And there's different means of communication that go faster than in the past. And in my role on INSOL and frankly, as a team leader, I'm working hard to think creatively about how we advertise our role in the market and communicate with clients about issues. And writing the standard written alert probably is not it. You need to spend more time using other ways of communicating and getting the word out there about what we do. So, and I don't have the magic ball on it, but I know that it's different than it's been in the past, and it's going to continue to morph at blindingly fast speed. And what I actually see is a lot of the very boring work that young lawyers did is going to go away. And what I worry about is if you learned, and I got to where I am by the repetitions and seeing other people do it, how is it I'm actually going to train the new lawyer if you don't have that work needing to be done? And I think you're going to see small firms able to compete on a much larger scale by using AI. For my discovery review to bang heads with the largest firm in the world, I don't need 25 associates that then get parked. And similarly for drafting, et cetera, in the future and speed of responsiveness, a lot of it's going to be done in a much leaner way.
So what do you think of the following? Because I've been thinking about obviously the same thing as well. Because training of the next generation is very important, but is maybe a way of dealing with AI and the new technology to pair somebody that just starts with somebody like yourself or me, and almost shadow you with, but with the added tool that they are probably better at prompting and using AI and what have you, and it facilitates working together because they can provide something, the technology that maybe is more difficult for us to, handle very quickly. But if you do it together and you have the experience and expertise, then it helps on both sides. So it's
Are
a
you saying
tool that actually connects people, as opposed to it makes it less necessary to hire junior people.
So you're saying I'm old enough to need a crutch? I'm teasing.
No,
No, let
I
me
think you're taking
respond.
this way too personally. Obviously, you're very quick and you will just immediately get it. But again,
No,
if
but
you
you're
grew
gonna.
up with it.
I think you are actually thinking of the current technology in the way that it is difficult to use, and it still requires, say, a prompt, as you say. I think that technology in 10 years, I am going to talk into my cell phone, and I am actually going to receive the memo written because it's going to be the processing power is going to be so fast. And of course, it will still need to be interpreted and there'll still be mistakes, right? Machines aren't going to totally do it. But I'm going to say, I need a cash collateral motion or I need this. And it's not going to be as hard to get it out of the system. There's a lot of training of the systems that needs to take place. But I think it's going to become simpler and simpler to use the complicated technology.
But you want to train. You want to still have an environment where it makes sense for people with experience to work with people that don't have experience and find ways to do it. I mean, we're now not dragging everybody to an in-person meeting, but they may be on a Zoom or a Teams call, and there could be many of those. But maybe this is another way of different generations working together.
But
And
who
it's not
pays for
because
that?
you're too old.
Right. So that training right now, we have a system in the United States where law school is 3 years at $200,000 or more after you've completed your undergraduate degree at a top school. And it probably is more than that now, right? And what are you doing for those 3 years? You're not paired with somebody who's actually training you. You are learning particular subject areas and you're learning whatever the technology is I spent half of a year learning to use a law library and find books, right? Well, that doesn't have to happen anymore. And what have law schools replaced that with? I think actually
Mm.
law school should be 1 year, and then it should be 2 years of training, so that you actually
Interesting.
have a system where you can afford to take that person instead of 3 years. That poor person borrows $300,000 to survive it if they're going through it, and then they need to make $300,000 a year to carry their law school loans. That is a broken educational system, completely broken. And it's a broken profession for the clients who are expected to pay for that person to sit next to the lawyer. Well, you're getting training, and it's in many cases being dumped on a client.
Yeah.
So,
No.
and I'll speak this in a very parochial way. You look at Nixon Peabody, we are a lot flatter than a lot of other firms. For a while, we were close to one partner to one non-partner. Now it's probably closer to 1 to 2, but we are not 1 to 7, and we are not hiring 100 people where we know that 90 of them are going to be spit out. We're very good at
Yeah.
hiring laterals. We have a very small summer program, and we work hard at training people. And I think that gives us a step up on where we're going. And I think that's actually going to be what's needed to facilitate exactly what you're saying, which is the way somebody is going to get trained is going to be by the side of somebody who has done it before, so they can learn to apply the judgment and advise on the judgment. And we need to get to an economic system of legal education and legal practice training that provides that. And the UK and other European countries are probably much closer to than we are today, where we've got this it's broken. It's crazy, and it's rooted in the fact that the universities in the United States, you're getting me on a tirade now, but the universities in the United States realize, wow, I can make all this money with lawyers, and all I got to do is buy some books. And now I don't even need some books. I need a building with some classrooms, and then I can charge them $100,000 a year. That is just wrong. And it needs to change, because it's not
Yeah.
serving anyone. But enough of
I
that.
think the US definitely is unique in certain aspects, but it's interesting, and it's also something that I want to further explore with other people on the podcast that maybe have more of an academic background as to where is this going. Because I think there's all valid points. Apprenticeships being much more in vogue again, ways into the profession.
Right.
It is something to think about. Another aspect on social media I'd like to have your take on, which worries me an awful lot, is if you are on social media, it looks like the whole world is successful all the time, doing all the nicest things, and you're the only one who actually, is average. Have once in a while something to report, but not much. And it's like, what's going on? I'm an absolute loser, and I fear that, especially in our sort of practice area, failure, right? Challenges, suffering. It's very much part of our profession, and you may look 30 years on, see, oh well, the position that you have acquired, that must have been, all wins. No, it hasn't been all wins. Actually, it has been a lot of challenges, as you say, luck and opportunities that weren't sort of, predicted or planned. And that is what life is. And I feel like the social media input that the next generation gets makes it maybe more difficult for them to sort of deal with, I guess, quote unquote, failure. And failure, I find, is also such a, it's a loaded term, and it's not a term I really like because, especially where we started with, we want to have a rescue culture, you want to have a go. Well, actually, you need to have some challenges in order to learn something.
So that's like 2 days of conversation over a case of wine or something, Peter. That's that. but
Hey, I have the time. I know maybe you
yeah,
need to wrap it up, but
no, I'll
some thoughts that you have, and again, if you're pressed for time, just let me know.
no, I'm fine. So my comment on that is, um, uh, I am better doing a fiberglass job on a boat or repairing a diesel engine than I am at social media. So you're asking the wrong person this question in a way, but I also have thought about it. And my view is that, human happiness actually comes from striving, and working hard at something, and less so from having it. And that's what's missing in a lot of what's communicated over social media. And as a parent, of course, I think about this as a professional mentoring people in the firm, and I try to hire people who will work hard, which is harder and harder to do now. But I worry about this and have worried about it, and Cheryl and I have as a parent, right? You want your children to be able to deal with the difficult situations and overcome them because they're there and they're real. And social media and media in all ways has distorted that. But I think it's less, well, it's more in your face with social media, right? Literally videos screaming at you. If you look back on history and you were to pick up a newspaper from the late 1800s, you might actually see the same kind of description. People try to focus on that success instead of what it takes to get there and how it takes some luck to get there. There's
Is
my
there
belief.
anything that sort of pops in your mind of a challenge you have been able to overcome in your practice where, things didn't go the way you thought they would go, but in the end, you were able to, have a lesson learned and it set you up to do something much more successful down the road that probably wouldn't have come if you hadn't had the challenge?
Um, I had that very odd formative experience of literally having lost the job and trying to start a law practice. I mean, literally, Peter, I would go to the Boston College alumni office and get the names of the alumni who would offer advice to students. And after you get the third advice network, blah, 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 right? You're like, all right, I don't really need another conversation. But I realized I needed some money. And so I would go through these interviews with people where I'd be asking for career advice. And then at the end, I would say, I'm available to do legal research and writing. And I found myself with them saying, yeah, I have a need, and giving me cash at the end of the week and paying my bills. And I was building a law firm. And that sort of step by step, grinding it out, hard work. And then, you could say randomly, but you could say through creating the opportunity, a professor met somebody hiring at a mailbox. That sticks with me forever. And it just, sometimes you need to grind it out and you don't know where the good opportunity is going to come from and when you're going to find the win.
Yeah.
And I'll bring it back again to sailing. In sailboat racing, it's an incredibly random sport, especially across oceans, because nobody can predict where the wind will show up. And so you can be way behind and, you can still win because you get lucky or something happens to the other people in terms of adverse winds. And so you have to be tenacious. And so that would probably be how I would sum it up, is to be
Yep.
tenacious. You try to teach people who you're working with to be tenacious. And that actually achieves great results for clients.
So was law and being a lawyer your calling in the end, looking back, or did you sort of miss your calling because actually, you should have been a professional sailor all along?
No, I'm really lucky and I'm doing both now, Peter.
It's
I mean, when I
it's
get to
it's
do the Bermuda race, I'm in the double-handed division. I'm competing against professional sailors, and I'm just so freaking lucky to be able to compete, even though I'm not saying I'm their equal. You spend a lot of time raising children, and you could never do both while you're there. But at this point in time, I'm able to do both, so I don't actually have to answer that question.
excellent. So it's both. Actually, it has happened.
And
Uh, uh, uh,
I would be really bored with just one and not the other. I can't
yeah,
imagine not practicing at a high level because it's just a great intellectual challenge and great people and a lot of fun. So,
yeah. Well, that's really beautiful to hear. Maybe we can sort of land the plane by what's your advice for anybody, younger people that may want to start a career in special sits? What would you give them as your advice?
um, mm, so I would say to get some real business experience outside of the law or accounting. so that you actually understand how a business works. And then make sure that you are sort of personally comfortable with the stress that comes with working with the craziness, and that before you dive into it. And then my biggest piece of advice to people is, and this comes to sort of all lawyers and professionals, is it's a very odd job in a large firm or any law firm really, or in a financial advisory firm where you're working by the hour and there really is no limit to how much you can work. And the people above you, many of them are struggling themselves, and trying to figure out how to succeed. And their success in the short term comes from making you work really hard. You need to find that balance that works for you so that you don't literally hurt yourself physically, burn out, and not get to your ultimate professional success, and you're able to stay with it to develop the skill set over time. And that's a really hard thing to do in most institutions, and is to think long term about it and to pace yourself, because it really is a marathon.
That's right. So has your profession, made you a lawyer? Would you identify yourself as a lawyer right now because that is what your profession has been?
N Yeah, I would, and I do actually wonder how, when you do something again and again and again for years, how it shapes you or warps you. I'm very cognizant of that, but yeah, I'm very much a lawyer and happy to be a lawyer, and I think like a lawyer, and I think I've actually gotten to the point that I'm pretty good at
Excellent.
it.
Well,
Hopefully.
it was a pleasure to have you on the podcast today, Rick. Thanks very much for your time.
You're welcome, Peter. Take care.
Excellent.